It's Miguel. How are you doing? How are you doing, Emily? How are things? So today is the 4th of November, 2018, and it's a Sunday. And, you know, I'm kind of interested if the daylight savings time has changed already. Has daylight savings time changed already? Yes, it has. My goodness, it's a whole hour earlier. It's 8:47 right now in the morning. Holy cow. Wow. It's kind of funny. I've just happened upon this. That means I got up at 4 in the morning this morning. Oh, crazy. Oh, man. That's amazing because I usually get up at 5 in the morning. So I fell back officially. Fascinating. This whole time change is pretty remarkable. And actually, I have a feeling that in the future, this time change won't be happening. There was recently an election. This is midterm election season. And I sent in my ballot. And one of the items on the ballot was this initiative to have the California legislature be able to weigh in on whether we use daylight savings time all year around or not. And for some reason, I thought this was kind of interesting that our California legislature apparently doesn't have the power to make that change, that it's a federal rule. And anyway, I actually did vote on how I believe, or I think that, it might be a good idea for the California legislature to weigh in on the subject. So I guess it's about asserting states' rights, whatever. But my main interest is in daylight savings time. I love daylight savings time. I'm a big fan of daylight savings time, and I wish that daylight savings time occurred all year round. And I'm guessing that might be an ultimate outcome of the vote, this midterm election. And I have a feeling that California might decide to do daylight savings time all year round. And for me, that's exciting and wonderful. And I'm looking forward to that happening because I love daylight savings time. And I don't really like this whole fall back, spring forward type thing, particularly in the winter months. Because for me, it makes the winter months a lot darker and a little more dreary. And I want to have as much daylight in my day as possible. In fact, I wouldn't mind 2 hours of daylight savings time, not just 1 hour, but 2 hours of daylight savings time. It seems like a trivial matter, but for me it's not, because I love the sun. I love the sunshine. I love to be out of doors when the sun is shining, and I would rather have my sun shine in the afternoon and evenings than in the mornings. It's as simple as that. Now, I don't know if other people share my view, and I guess we'll see how things turn out. Anyway, I'm curious, how are you doing, girl? How are things going for you? I had this idea this morning about going to see the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, and seeing that movie with you. That movie is about the band Queen. And I think Queen is still performing, certainly without Freddie Mercury, because Freddie Mercury's dead. But I think Queen is still performing. I think they performed with Adam, what's his last name? I forget. He was the one who won a lot of awards on, the American Music Showdown. Anyway, I'm a big fan of the band Queen, and they've got some great songs, great classic songs. Honestly, I don't know if they have songs that they've produced lately, like that is new songs. That might be something worth checking out. I can always ask Google, and but that's kind of interesting. I'm kind of feeling excitable this morning. I'm really not sure why. I've basically been sitting on the couch for the last couple days just doing work on my laptop computer. And So I haven't been that active. I'm actually thinking about going to the gym later on today. Anyway, I hope you're doing well, and we'll start our session like we always do, and that is by reading from the book Peaceful Living, the book by Mary McKenzie. And so let's see what she has to say today, this November 4th. And we start out with the passage by a quote from Natalie Goldberg. Let's see what she has to say. We look out and see the goodness in other people, but we don't see it in ourselves. The act of turning around and catching the goodness in ourselves is to wake up. Our consciousness, that lost, scared soldier, finally meets itself. Okay, this is more of a poetry quote. So let me read that one again. Again, this is by Natalie Goldberg. She says, we look out and see the goodness in other people, but we don't see it in ourselves. The act of turning around and catching the goodness in ourselves is to wake up. Our consciousness, that lost sacred soldier, finally meets itself. Natalie Goldberg. Wow, I really like this quote. I think it's really powerful. And it's kind of interesting that the human brain functions in a way where there is sort of disdain for itself. What an odd thing for an organ to do, sort of turn on itself like that. It is. And this quote brings to light this idea about how it's consciousness raising to see the good in ourselves. And I think that's really true. It's interesting how we have to be reminded about it. This sort of reminds me of this idea about how early man, through our evolution in time, the human brain has sort of focused on avoiding negative things. And, with that in mind, I guess it makes more sense that the human brain might sort of turn on itself. That is, it might notice what's wrong about the thought process and what's wrong about a certain person's attitude or perspective, and might turn on itself as a way to sort of protect what's valuable in the mind. And so I can see how that might be. If throughout all of our lives we're focused on the negative, negative information is like a magnet to human attention. All you need to do is look at newspapers and the news, and you can see that is the case. And so I guess it makes sense that the mind would turn on itself like this. And that is create tension and discomfort, emotional pain, as it looks upon itself. What's kind of interesting is that the intention behind this focus on the negative is self-preservation, right? In fact, it's worked. The strategy has worked because human beings, we have been self-preserving for millennia, and we continue to strive and thrive with this particular mindset. So, one has to admit that the mindset works. It's functional in a world such as ours, where we have limited resources and, death is around every corner, right? Staying away from death is a priority so that we can, sort of spread our genes in the form of children, maximizing the longevity of ourselves and our progeny. So pretty amazing stuff. I also really like this idea here. It says, our consciousness, this is the last sentence of the quotation by Natalie Goldberg. It says, our consciousness, that lost sacred soldier, finally meets itself. And I'm really keen to understand and to explore this idea of the lost sacred soldier. Now, what would get Natalie Goldberg to think of our consciousness as a lost sacred soldier? Well, I can imagine that a lost consciousness is a consciousness where there's just total freedom to act and no sort of objective guidance from above, sort of describing what to do and where to go. I can imagine that being lost is actually quite a good and apt metaphor for that idea of sort of a consciousness sort of lost in the world without any direction, sort of what I'd call without any necessary direction. All direction from human consciousness is internal, right? It comes from within. And so I can see the lost aspect of that metaphor really coming to light now. Now, the scared soldier part of the metaphor is quite interesting. Why would the soldier be scared? Well, we just touched on it, and that is it's about self-preservation and how we're focused on avoidance and separation quite often to protect ourselves, to protect what's valuable. That's what human beings have been doing for millennia. We sort of protect ourselves from emotional pain and certainly from change in our lives. We sort of do our best to avoid threats and things that are concerning to us. And so we are scared. Not only are we lost as people, with this mind, but we're scared in that we are avoiding and separating ourselves from things that we find fearful. And then the part of the metaphor talks about the soldier. And so what is it about the soldier? Well, in my mind, the idea of a soldier brings about these thoughts of courage and bravery. And you know what? That is very apt to the human consciousness. How, in a world where we are lost and where we are scared, anything that we do, we do on account of our bravery. We do on account of our courage to act despite the fear. That's just what human beings do. We're courageous and bold. Even stepping into a car, driving on the street to go to the grocery store really involves high levels of risk taking. I don't know what the exact figure is, but I think that 66,000 people a day die on our streets here in the United States of America. Now, I could be mistaken. It's probably a different number altogether, but I think it's a very high number. At any moment we could trip on the floor, break our neck or whatever. There's so much unpredictability in our lives as human beings. There's so many ways to die right now. Personally, I don't consider this very often because I've basically become adapted to the level of risk in my life. And, you just accept the fact that driving is the most dangerous thing I do in my day, which will change hopefully when autonomous vehicles start coming onto the scene and start protecting people's lives that way through the use of artificial intelligence and high technology. And anyway, I'm moving a little bit far afield here, but I really like this metaphor of the scared, lost soldier. There's also another aspect to it, and that is, I'm reminded about how the human brain makes itself suffer. People think often about heaven and hell and how it's often an internal perspective, an internal attitude that creates it. I talk about how everything in life is projection, and how, the slings and pains of modern life, the slings and arrows of modern life, how quite often these are self-inflicted wounds. Soldiers, receive, take on harm and hurt according to their profession. And, that's something that the human consciousness does regularly, with the intent on protecting and preserving what a person finds valuable and meaningful in their lives. They may consciously or unconsciously engage in emotional pain, using emotional pain to control behavior and to control attitudes and ideas. And it's kind of interesting about how the brain does that, how it sort of segregates life, differentiates life into sort of painful and unpainful moments, and how it does it itself. It uses essentially firewalls and all types of other ways to sort of, how should I say this? It's just that it's the source of our internal pain is us. That's what I'm trying to say. These painful ideas are constructed in our own mind. And the pain that people feel is almost essentially, well, it is 100% self-generated. And, that is an interesting conundrum. How can it be that the entity that causes pain is also the same entity that acts to preserve itself? What is it about the brain that causes itself to create pain? If you think about it, depression is a prime example of this whole phenomenon. Essentially, we have a brain that's turned on itself, right? A brain that causes emotional pain on itself and inhibits its own survival. How does one go about explaining that? In psychology, there's this idea of, what is it called? It's a perspective. It's sort of like the selfish perspective of the human mind, and how the human mind is egoistic, right? There's the egoic personality where, the personality is acting in its own self-interest all the time. And, there's a theory that describes this tendency of human beings to, always act in their own self-interest. And the question is, how do you square the egoic personality with a personality that also inflicts emotional pain on itself? That's where the soldier metaphor comes in really aptly, I think. And it has to do with how, how the brain is clearly seeking to achieve values, right? To gain a value and keep a value. And one of the techniques, one of the strategies it uses is the self-infliction of emotional pain. I mean, what an amazing tool. What an amazing strategy. Apparently that's how the brain inhibits behavior that it wants to extinguish, right? It uses emotional pain to do that. And you know what? It's quite an effective strategy. Humans are, I would guess, one of the more inhibited animals on the planet. I look at animals, particularly small ones like birds and squirrels and cats, for example, and dogs. They're always sensing their external environment, looking for threats. Human beings are exactly the same way. When I drive or I walk down the street, I'm constantly, almost like a bird, just sort of focusing and scanning my environment, almost bird-like. And I'm vigilant and watchful, and I'm looking for threats. For example, if I'm in a parking lot, I'm looking for vehicles that might have their reverse lights on, or maybe I'm asking myself whether I can hear the roar of an engine under a hood in a car, right? I'm asking myself, okay, where are the people going and what are those people's intentions, right? I'm being intuitive, right? I'm using my intuitive skills to sort of ascertain, essentially guess what the intentions of other people are who are getting into or out of their vehicles. And so, I'm using all the tools at my disposal, my sensory, my sensory tools, and then I'm also using my emotional intelligence, where I'm asking myself, what do these people intend to do, and are they acting in ways that will harm me if I continue in this walking in this current direction in the parking lot? This is all happening at the same time. It's just continuous. And I'm also in my mind imagining what might happen is, say, if the car backs out and sort of rolls over me unintentionally. I'm looking at the curb, and I'm imagining, well, I could possibly trip on this curb and fall to the ground and hurt myself. It's kind of interesting how our imagination just plays out these scenarios of potential harm. We're noticing risks and hazards in our path. And, just walking in the parking lot of a strip mall, we are using all of these tools as animals, and we are moving forward bravely, right? Walking through a parking lot is a brave act, right? Though I'm probably walking through a parking lot, say, to get groceries at the grocery store, to achieve, I have a need for nourishment. I have a need for water. I have a need for food. And I'm trying to satisfy these needs by walking to the grocery store. And in order to do that, I have to I have to act in ways that are bold and courageous. So anyway, I think the soldier metaphor is very apt for the human consciousness. Anyway, that's just one quotation that I've analyzed. It's time to read the rest of the material. That is the rest of the comment by Mary Mackenzie. Well, thank you, Natalie Goldberg. I really appreciate that extremely poetic metaphor about the human condition. So let's see how you've already heard how I responded to the quotation. I wonder how Mary Mackenzie will respond to the quotation. So her response is subtitled, Understanding the Beauty Behind Your Needs. She goes on to say, all people have the same universal needs, including love, support, caring, food, water, respect, intimacy, and joy. Everything we do or say is an attempt to meet these needs. Sometimes, when we do or say something we regret, we forget that our actions or words were an attempt to meet a beautiful universal need. The next time you feel regret about something you said or did, consider the need that you were trying to meet instead of berating yourself. If you made an obscene hand gesture to the driver in front of you, it is possible that you were trying to meet a need for safety. Is it possible that you were trying to meet a need for safety or consideration? If you snapped at the grocery clerk, could your need have been for efficiency or ease? If you told your child to shut up, did you need peace and cooperation? Once we have acknowledged the need we try to meet, we are in a better position to consider what else we can do next time that is likelier to help us meet it. This will also help us decide whether we need to do something to rectify what we have done. And the thought for the day is, be aware today of the needs that drive your actions and words. So I really think that this is a profound understanding. It's important that we examine our needs, because I think too often we focus and automatically move to the strategy, right? It's about the strategy. Human beings, when we have plans, we're talking about strategies. But we so very rarely think about the underlying needs that motivate the strategies. And, it's important to know about what needs we're trying to meet, because the strategies can be optimized. If we have a clear idea of what our needs are, we might be able to choose better strategies, or strategies that help us meet those needs more effectively than, say, the automatic strategies that come to mind. In fact, we might find that we don't even need to take action. For example, I talk about traveling a lot, and I also talk about how I don't necessarily care to travel very much. And I think part of the reason is that I have some deep, deep awareness of what I love about travel is essentially I have a value for excitement and a love of learning. And, one thing I also know is that travel can be pretty expensive. It can also throw me out of my routine, which is great. I mean, there's a lot of personal growth that can come from from travel, certainly worldwide travel. But like I mentioned, it also can be, but not always is, expensive. And, there's a cost that relates to travel. And so for me, I've sort of recognized this. I recognize the cost, and I tried to go with, let's say, a lower cost way of satisfying my need for learning and excitement. Turns out that there are lots of ways to satisfy my needs for learning and excitement. I can learn about cultures by learning a language or reading a book or watching a documentary. And then to satisfy my need for excitement, say by being in a different place, I can take day trips, or I could even just walk around the block, but walk around the block with new eyes. And that is with the intention to sort of focus on the flora or the fauna or the geologic time, the stones, right? The rocks and minerals that exist on my path. Maybe I've been interested in learning more about culture. One thing I could do is focus on, say, the signs and the words, the typography, and get some insights about how typography shapes our understanding of culture and what it's all about. So I guess what I'm talking about is how if you have a deep understanding of the needs you're trying to satisfy, it can free up your time, energy, and money because you can use strategies that will meet your needs and at the same time sort of not have a lot of cost or a lot of risk. So anyway, I think that for some reason our culture is really focused on international travel. And there are costs related to that. I've traveled before, and I've really valued the traveling that I've done and the learning that's come along with that. But, there are other ways to do it. Flying in airplanes has a really dramatic environmental impact in terms of its carbon footprint. And but there are other costs and expenses. It throws you off. You're off your schedule, certainly, which is something that I find valuable. I tend to be a person who appreciates habit and having control over their time. Anyway, I guess I'm kind of going afield here, but I really appreciate what Mary McKenzie has to say, and I do think that understanding your needs is very important. Because I actually think it's possible to be mistaken about whether a strategy will meet your needs or not. In fact, a lot of people use strategies that are completely ineffective and even run counter to satisfying their needs. I know. It happens all the time. It happens every day. And I think pretty much many people do it throughout the day. They act in ways contrary to their interests, contrary to their needs, because of thoughtlessness, really. Anyway, one thing that's interesting to me about some of Mary McKenzie's statements is that she talks about the beauty behind the need. Beautiful needs is a common phrase here, and I think I'd like to explore that idea of the beautiful needs and what it means. I mean, why do you think she talks about needs as being beautiful? I don't know why that doesn't work. So that's a good question. Why do you think Mary Mackenzie talks about needs as being beautiful? Why do I think she talks about needs as being beautiful? I mean, after all, what is beautiful about a need? Well, when I learn about other people's needs, I find that to be very valuable information. I want to know about other people's needs. In fact, quite often, people hide what their true needs are. And they do it because, well, there's a lot of reasons to hide what your needs are and what your values are. First of all, criticism, judgment from others, moral judgment in particular. And there's also other reasons. What if you express your needs and another person is not willing to fulfill those needs? What does that mean? Basically, it can change the meaning of a relationship that you have with the people around you, and that's a high risk endeavor. Quite often though, which is kind of interesting, it can deepen the relationship. It has the power to both weaken and strengthen a relationship. And what it means, what it also means is that there's change, the possibility of changes in your relationship. And that's all it takes, is the expression of a need. And it requires vulnerability, right? Which is courageous, because when you start expressing your needs, you start expressing you're sort of acknowledging this willingness to change. It's sort of when a person expresses their needs, it's about, it's quite often they're looking for a change to happen. That the need has become so important, it's bubbled up within them, and it's something that they feel they need to express. And it has the potential and the power to change relationships. The expression of needs has the potential and power to change the future. And when I talk about needs, I don't just mean about like food, water, shelter, clothing needs. That is essential needs. I'm also talking about wishes and desires and goals and dreams. By expressing these to the people around you, they get to know you better. Your relationships have the potential to either strengthen or weaken. And, maybe you'll create a world that meets your needs better than the one that you have right now. So it opens up a lot of potential for change. And, you also sort of open yourself up to criticism, right? And that's why being vulnerable requires so much courage and bravery. Anyway, I think I've probably beat that one to death. But, it's something that's been on my mind lately. I've been thinking about, here's the thing about being human too. You're not always certain about what you need. I talk a lot about uncertainty. And quite often it's unclear. I could on a daily basis assert my needs and wants and desires regularly and frequently when I'm with others, but I choose not to. And you might ask yourself, well, why? Well, I think it might just boil down to change. As human beings, we live lives that are well-worn, in the sense that we walk down well-worn paths. And change can often be seen as a threat, even if it's positive change. Because, I can imagine people who say, win the lottery. That means quite often when people win lotteries, it means significant changes in their lives and in their relationships, and even their relationship to themselves. And, change can be uncomfortable sometimes, even good change. It opens yourself up to new risks, new challenges, new learnings, and it's quite often transformative. And the problem with transformation is that, quite often it comes with its costs and its benefits. It's most transformations that I know about that occur in human beings aren't 100% pure benefit. You often lose something. Maybe you lose a relationship, or you lose some perspective. And, people want to honor. They honor the traditions, they honor the past, they honor traditional values. And, that's just who we are. We love what works and what's worked in the past. And anyway, let me suggest that we change the subject. So one item that I've been wanting to discuss is Christmas. Christmas has been on my mind lately because it is November and Christmas is on its way, and Christmas is one of my favorite holidays. And about last week or so, I picked up this book called Hark, a Christmas Sampler. And it essentially does a lot of exploring around the holiday of Christmas. And I figured that it would be a lot of fun for me to talk about Christmas and what I enjoy about the holiday on the eve of Christmas happening. It's essentially here. And one of the subjects that this book addresses is Christmas animals. Now, in past sessions, we've discussed Christmas plants, and we've also discussed Christmas gift giving and its origins. And now we're going to discuss Christmas animals. I think holidays are interesting to delve into. There's something about sort of like this mass movement of people, cultures and societies that get together and make a decision collectively that they want to honor certain values, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever, Ramadan or whatever holiday. I think that itself is a phenomenon that is worth thinking about and talking about. Essentially, these are traditions. They are also rituals that groups of people have decided, we want to honor. We want to honor certain values and virtues in this way, in this specific way, with these behaviors and ideas on a regular basis. We want to do it every year, right? And so that in itself is significant. There's something valuable. There's something at the essence of these holidays, which not just one person values or 10 people, but millions of people value. And I think it is fitting to explore those values and ideas behind those holidays. So let's do it. So let me begin by reading a passage from this book about Christmas animals. Let's learn about what animals are associated with Christmas. Cows, horses, and oxen were said to have warmed baby Jesus with their breath, and because of it, they are included in many Christmas celebrations. Okay, let me interrupt here for a moment, or pause for a moment here, and mention that I had no idea. Okay, here I am, 47 years old. I really had no idea that cows, horses, and oxen were associated with Christmas at all. Okay. So that just shows how culturally illiterate I am regarding Christmas. For me, Christmas is about Christmas trees and Christmas lights and Christmas carols and candy canes. And for it to be associated with cows, horses, and oxen is like, it's a complete zinger. It's like, where did that come from? So I'm also intrigued about this idea about how these animals' breath warmed the baby Jesus. And for that reason alone, that is why cows, horses, and oxen are honored. Now that is a very subtle reason for entire groups, entire species of animals to be honored. Wow, what fascinating story. So I'll move on with a commentary. It says, in certain regions of England, the farm family crowds into the barn to drink toasts to the health of the animals. In some Polish farmsteads, unleavened or unrisen bread is served to the horses and cows. What? Italian farmers and shepherds carry candles into their barns on Christmas Eve, bringing light to every dark corner. It is a custom in Norway to feed cows salt from a cowbell on Christmas Eve so they can find their way home at night. Oh, what? That's, these are hilarious in the sense that they're completely, I would have never made connections between this behavior and Christmas. Okay, and the passage goes on to say, in many European countries and in many of the American states, there are stories about farm animals being able to speak at midnight on Christmas Eve. Okay, what? What is this all about? Okay, one of the fascinating things about this learning about cultures and holidays is the associations that are made are completely off the wall. I mean, what? So I'm going to do my best to try to explain, to get my hands around these ideas, to get my brain around these ideas. I can't believe it. It's really quite unbelievable. I mean, farmers and shepherds carrying candles into their barns on Christmas Eve, bringing light to every dark corner? What? What does that have to do with anything? It's pretty interesting. Here's the thing about religion, and that quite often it is a conglomeration of contradictory ideas. It's like it's sort of slapped together. I get this sense that it's slapped together. I mean, this whole idea of animals speaking at midnight on Christmas Eve is it's like a fanciful conglomeration of things that don't make any sense at all. And how is that related to Christmas Eve? The whole ideas of animals speaking. See, this basically is an example of my cultural illiteracy and my lack of understanding about history and culture as it relates to religion, certainly. I mean, this basically, what these passages describe are avenues for more explanation about what's going on. Clearly, this is just a summary treatment of some of the ideas that relate to Christmas Eve. And let me tell you right now, it's blowing my socks off. All right. So let's move on to the next page where it talks about, of all things, bees. Now, I have no idea how bees relate to Christmas at all, nor have I ever heard about bees being related to Christmas. And to me, these pictures are contradictory. For example, I grew up in the winter. I grew up in a place that got a lot of snow during the winter time, and I can pretty much remember no bees being around when after a snow. I don't remember really any flying things sort of flying around, except for perhaps maybe indoors, houseflies, for example. But I really can't think of bees being around during the wintertime. I don't have any memories of bees being around. Now, naturally, bees are someplace. I don't quite know how bees handle the wintertime. But I certainly don't relate bees to Christmas Eve. So let's move on to this subject. The passage states, bees were believed to buzz lullabies on Christmas Eve in parts of England. What? This is amazing. Even today, some British beekeepers place a bit of holly on the hives in late December. Wow. Bees buzzing lullabies. That's fascinating. You know, it's kind of funny. When I hear the buzz of a bee, in a way, it's a little bit unsettling. I've been bit by bees before, and it's no big deal. I don't mind being bit by bees. But I know that when I hear bees buzzing in a bush or something, some kind of fragrant bush, personally, my attention goes to that not because I feel relaxed and wanting to go to sleep, but my attention goes there because I'm a little concerned that I might get stung. So the idea of bees buzzing lullabies, that is songs that children listen to when they're going to bed, to me is just really an odd piece of lore. The passage goes on to say, German settlers in Pennsylvania believed that the bees crawled outside their hives on Christmas Day no matter how cold the weather or how fast the snow fell. This is fascinating because if you care for bees, if you are a beekeeper, you can very directly make observations about whether this statement is true or not. I mean, has it ever been the case that bees leave their hives when it's snowing and essentially when it's really cold? I mean, even I don't like to go outside when it's really cold. And look at all the masks that I have and all the protection I have from the elements. Bees have even less protection. It's not like bees have winter coats and hats that they can wear. I'm not sure why a bee would march outside the hive when it's snowing or cold. Fascinating. Also, the passage goes on to say, camels, called ships of the desert, were what the three wise men rode as they followed the star in the east. Camels are still used today for desert transportation, and many Christmas legends, stories, and poems feature camels. And that's true. So I think I understand kind of what's going on here. You know, so there are scriptural texts, right? Biblical texts that describe Christmas animals. And I think that when people read these texts, they make associations between the animals in the book and the animals around them. And, you know, they act in ways to honor, they tell these stories to honor the animals and to honor the text. You know, they're describing what I'd call remarkable occurrences, miraculous occurrences. You know, this idea of animals, farm animals talking on Christmas Eve. You know, I think it's a way of just honoring the story and honoring the characters in the story by giving them these superpowers, right? By giving them these unique traits on certain days. You know, I think these ideas are quite memorable. You know, they stimulate the imagination. And I think for that reason, they are, you know, you retain these ideas and they get passed down from children to their children to their children through the generations. And, you know, it's about significance, right? It's about where people are finding meaning and how people choose to create new meaning, right? And how they're choosing meaning in a way that honors what they value, right? Even if it doesn't happen to make any sense or seems pretty fantastic or fanciful. You know, these are ideas that give people pleasure. You know, I can imagine, you know, just like thoughts can cause pain, thoughts can cause pleasure too. And even I, who am very skeptical of this idea of bees buzzing lullabies on Christmas Eve, you know, I do when I imagine the image of bees buzzing lullabies, feel comforted. There is part of me that does feel comforted. This idea brings comfort to me. And, I think that is a big part of Christmas, is that there's this idea of comfort. There are comfort foods, animals act in ways that are comforting. Maybe they're speaking and talking in unique ways. I mean, the idea of a talking animal is comfortable to me. I feel pleased when I hear that, because it's interesting and remarkable and meaningful, and it just feels good. It feels cozy to sort of imagine this idea that animals have breathed their breath on the baby Jesus to warm the baby Jesus. I feel comforted to know that, because I've had animals breathe on me, and I've recognized that the warmth from their breath feels good, right? And so, okay, I'm really getting a sense now of what these holidays are all about. These holidays are about preserving values. They're about honoring ideas. They're about creating ideas that bring comfort and joy to people, right? Even if they don't make any sense, even if they aren't verifiable, it's essentially a collection of ideas, often disparate ideas, often contradictory traits. And it's sort of bringing all this together in a collection during a certain time of a year, like winter, for example, for Christmas anyway. And it's sort of collecting this in a giant hug, a giant comforting hug, where we're honoring and appreciating and using our fantastic creativity and imagination to develop these folk tales in ways that bring comfort and joy to people. That's really what a holiday is anyway. Even if quite often the basis for the holiday is, extremely hurtful and harmful. Like, for example, I think about the juxtaposition of Thanksgiving as a holiday and Thanksgiving as, say, the colonizing political overthrow of Native American peoples, right? So there's a huge contrast there. There's the reality, and right there's the fantasy. Now, of course, reality is sort of a mix of the two. And in a way, these holidays are sort of a stark separation of reality and fantasy, and a preserving of the fantasy, and a forgetting of the reality. And you know what? I like it. I can tell you, I enjoy Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays. Though, of course, when I contemplate the idea of the colonization of the Americas by European powers, political powers, I'm a lot less enthused by contemplating that idea. But that doesn't stop me from loving the idea of Thanksgiving. And it's kind of interesting how people do that. It's about making life interesting and meaningful and pleasant, because life is often harsh and cruel. And the discord is hurtful. Thinking about colonization of Native American peoples, essentially they were wiped out, and much of their culture was wiped out in the process of the colonization, and it's tragic. The tragedy is almost overwhelming. Truly, it is overwhelming. And thankfully, we don't, at least it's actually, thankfully I'm not preoccupied by the subject, but I'm not a historian. But I recognize the tragedy, and I honor the tragedy. And, I recognize the truth of the tragedy. And, it's quite often, Human beings find a way, right? They find a way to cope with reality as it is. And part of that way is creating holidays, right? Creating significant and meaningful moments that relate to that way, to that period in some way that sort of allows for learning and contemplation, and maybe allows for lessons learned and a little bit of wisdom through the sort of the self-analysis. Anyway, pretty amazing stuff. Always enjoyed thinking about Christmas. And now let's go to the next segment in our session today, and that is going through the questions. So I've got my Kindle book. The intent of this, as I mentioned before, is just helping you to learn a little bit more about me so that, we can be more relatable when we get together. So what's the next question? Question number 224. What do you think of when you go to bed? I may have answered this question yesterday. I try to think of images, like landscapes, that are really comforting and calming. And I also try to think of memories, maybe that are pleasant. And perhaps I also think about, ideas that I have, things that are entertaining and light, because I want to go to sleep. So I engage in some enjoyable thinking, enjoyable thoughts. I have done I have thought about ideas that are distracting and bothersome at nighttime, and all that does is keep me up at night and makes me very ineffective in my day the next day. Okay, next question. Question number 225. Would you steal if you were to suffer no consequences? Okay. This question is a fanciful question, and I'm not going to answer it. I don't care to answer it because it's just not realistic in any way. Because, yeah. Okay, question number 226. Do you believe in aliens? Okay. Yeah, I believe that extraterrestrial life has a high probability of existing, and I think it's probably out there. I also acknowledge there's no evidence for it. So it's kind of funny. What does it mean to believe in aliens? Well, I believe that they are highly likely to be out there. Probably, at least in our local area of the universe, probably just in the form of single-celled or multicellular organisms. And they may even be in the form of organisms that are not explicitly can be defined as life. For example, viruses. I can imagine simple viruses existing on planets, places. Viruses aren't necessarily alive. If you've checked your biology textbooks, you'll know that to be true. And but I think the DNA and RNA, or at least the RNA viruses that are out there, I think essentially all we're talking about are molecules that have activity in the presence of other molecules. Yeah. So, next question. Well, you know what? I think I'm going to wrap this up. Emily, I just want to say thank you for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm feeling pretty energetic and excited today. So I think I'm going to go out there and, be energetic in the world today. I might go to the gym. I hope that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And I'll be in contact with you. I'll be sending you some letters in the meantime. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday. And I also want to underline and highlight the idea that, I love you and I cherish you, and I'm committed to growing healthily alongside you and, basically enjoying you and your presence, and us enjoying each other as a partner of father and daughter, as a partnership of father and daughter. So anyway, I love you and I think you're amazing, and I can't wait to see how your life unfolds as you grow into the amazing, mature, fantastic woman